Hey guys, welcome back. I hope you are having an amazing day. Let's get right into the stories. The first one is a pro-revenge story. In the late 2000s, when I was in college, I met Ryan, then 25, through mutual friends. He had already graduated and was planning to move across the country for grad school. Coincidentally, I had plans to move with friends just a short drive away from where he was headed. We hit it off instantly, sharing so many interests, and it felt like fate that we were both relocating thousands of miles but ending up so close. Ryan had two sisters and a younger brother, all wonderful people who became like family to me. Since Ryan was a student and I was working, I usually visited him on weekends. He rented a house with two roommates, also in his program. We were young and broke, but we had fun going on cheap taco dates and hanging out at his place where he bred and sold small pets. Ryan was an animal sciences PhD student, so being around animals was normal, and I loved it. I befriended his advisor's wife, Linda, mid-50s, who worked at the university. She was a lovely woman, and I often had lunch with her during my weekend visits. Ryan was a teaching assistant, TA, and I quickly made friends with others in his program faster than he did. After dating for about 2 years, we were lounging in bed one day when Ryan suddenly expressed concern that I had gained weight, making it harder for him to find me attractive. No concern for my health, just his attraction. I sat up, puzzled, and suggested that maybe he should ensure I had better food options than just crackers and cheese when I visited on weekends. Even at 23, I wasn't going to tolerate that nonsense. I had gained maybe 10 pounds since we met 2 years prior, but I still wore the same size clothes, around a US 8 to 10. I calmly asked what his solution was, and he just stared blankly, saying I should try to lose weight. I refused, put my clothes back on, and drove home the next day as usual. 3 months later, Ryan called to break up after nearly 3 years together. His reason, and I quote, "You don't know enough about science." He felt he couldn't have conversations about his work without using common names instead of scientific ones. I called bullcrap, demanding the real reason. He eventually admitted he had been seeing one of his undergrad students, let's call her Amy, who was 19 at the time while he was 26 and her teacher. I screamed at him to leave, and my roommate threatened to throw him off our balcony if he didn't go. As he walked out, the rage turned to stunned laughter. I had met Amy before, and at one point, she had spilled something on her pants at Ryan's house. He had asked me to loan her some sweats, but I couldn't because she was a size 18 and I was an 8. In hindsight, I realized he had made those comments about my weight to try and get me to break up with him because he was a coward who was clearly attracted to a bigger woman. I emailed Ryan's roommates to let them know we had broken up, and they admitted knowing about Amy and pressuring Ryan to tell me. One roommate, Matt, a super nice guy, offered to help me retrieve my belongings from their house while Ryan was gone. He suggested I come up for the weekend, go out drinking, and have fun, the things Ryan wouldn't waste money on. So I went up, Matt let me in, and I took photos of Ryan's animals, including an endangered species he had taken in from a rescue, but refused to register or pay the $25 fee, saying he didn't want government interference. I also photographed an illegal animal visible from the window. That night, Matt and I went out, and when we stumbled back drunk around midnight, we made sure Ryan and Amy, watching TV, saw me in a short dress with Matt practically carrying me. Matt spent the night in his room, but we giggled and moaned loudly for their benefit. In the morning, as I ate a donut slowly in my rumpled dress, Ryan called me a whore. I told him to enjoy my leftovers and left. The next day, I reported Ryan to the state wildlife officials with my photos, detailing the potential overcrowding and illegal animals. Matt and the other roommate had already filed complaints with the university about Ryan sleeping with a student and showing her favoritism. We made sure everyone in his small program knew. I also informed my friend Linda, Ryan's advisor's wife. She was appalled and ensured an investigation would be done. Sure enough, a few weeks later, Matt excitedly called to say wildlife officials were there confiscating animals. Amy tried to claim ownership, but since Matt was on the lease, he let them in. Ryan had just received a federal EPA grant, so I reported him for harboring endangered animals. Long story short, he lost the grant, had to repay $30,000 already used, was fined $15,000, and lost his priceless breeding animals. The university revoked his scholarship and fired him for the inappropriate student relationship. Months later, I emailed Ryan's sisters, who said he had claimed I broke up with him over the distance. I forwarded emails proving he left me for Amy, saying I couldn't keep up academically. Ryan's dad paid for one more year so he could get a master's instead of a PhD. Over the years, I stayed in touch with Ryan's siblings, who updated me. Ryan and Amy married and had kids, but she left science to become an accountant while he kept breeding animals. Apparently, at one sister's bridal shower, Ryan complained they were still friends with me, and the sister laughed, saying she didn't befriend homewreckers, exposing how Ryan and Amy's relationship began. Fast forward 15 years, and I was giving a lecture at a university when I heard Ryan's voice. I played dumb, pretending not to recognize him until he reintroduced himself. I was shocked but kept my composure, saying it was lovely to see him before moving along quickly when he tried to hug me. Later, the department chair told me Ryan had interviewed for a teaching position they were likely to offer him. I scoffed, explaining what had happened over 15 years ago with him sleeping with a student. They were appalled and said they'd look into it. Sure enough, my old friend Linda called to say someone doing a background check had found Ryan's fila with details of being feared, leaving with a lower degree, complaint letters about his conduct, and an arrest record for the illegal animals, expunged after paying fines. I don't think he'll get that job. So I'll continue my life, content that sometimes the universe comes through, especially with a little nudge. The best revenge is directing knowledge to the right places without doing anything wrong. If someone complains about your looks, that's their problem to fix mentally, not yours, and maybe a sign to move on. If Ryan had ended things maturely instead of being a coward, I might not have found out about Amy and turned his wickedness back on him. The next one is an entitled people story. I've lived on my family's land for as long as I can remember. My grandparents settled here years ago, building a modest farmhouse and tending the acres of fields and forest. This scenic spot has always been my sanctuary, a place to retreat from the noise and stress of everyday life. That peace was shattered when a new neighbor moved in next door. Right from the start, I could tell this woman was trouble. She just had that look about her, you know the type. Piercing eyes, permanently pursed lips, hair cut in a sharp bob, a walking, talking embodiment of the "can I speak to your manager" me. It didn't take long for my worst fears to be confirmed. The very first week she was there, I spotted her stomping along the property line, studying the old stone markers with a scrutinizing glare. When I went out to kindly introduce myself, her head snapped around, eyes narrowing at my approach. "You," she barked. "I'm assuming you're the owner of this quaint little plot next door?" I nodded, forcing a polite smile. "Yes, ma'am, and you must be my new neighbor. I just wanted to stop by and welcome you." She looked me up and down with a haughty sniff. "Charmed," she said flatly. "Well, I'll get right to the point then. Are you aware that your fence is encroaching on my land?" My eyebrows shot up in surprise. "I don't believe so. That fence was erected by my grandfather years ago. It's always marked the boundary line." "Yes, well, it's clearly over the line now," she declared. "I had a survey done, and you're infringing on my property. That's unacceptable. I'll expect you to move your fence post-haste." And with that, she whirled around and marched off, leaving me stunned. Over the next few weeks, the outrageous demands kept coming. She insisted a corner of my barn extended onto her land and would need to be relocated. The same went for my garden shed. My treehouse as a kid was deemed an eyesore that had to come down. I tried reasoning with her, showing her maps and surveys proving the structures were well within my bounds, but she refused to back down, repeating her claims that I was stealing her land. Things finally came to a head one morning when I awoke to the roar of bulldozers outside. I rushed from the house in a panic to find a demolition crew tearing down my shed. Standing nearby with a satisfied grin was none other than my dreadful neighbor. I was seeing red. Without thinking, I jumped in front of the bulldozers, shouting at them to stop. The crew looked baffled, but reluctantly cut the engines. Meanwhile, The Karen was screaming at me to get out of the way. That did it. I'd had enough of her crazy accusations and power plays. This time, I decided to fight fire with fire. First step was filing a temporary restraining order to keep her from damaging anything else on my property. A judge granted it easily once he heard her deranged claims about my land. Next, I got my own survey done, using the original plat maps left by my grandfather. They confirmed what I already knew. The fence and buildings were well within bounds. Armed with this proof, I turned the tables and took legal action against the Karen for destruction of property. I included photos documenting the shed demolition as evidence. She seemed shocked when the sheriff served her papers. Clearly, she thought she could intimidate me into giving up land without consequence. But I wasn't backing down. In the end, I didn't just win damages from her for the ruined shed. I dug deeper, consulting property records and discovering inconsistencies with her so-called survey. Turns out it was shoddy work, erroneously marking boundaries in her favor. I sued her for trying to seize my land under false pretenses. The court agreed she deliberately tried manipulating boundary lines to stage a land grab. The cherry on top? As punishment, the judge awarded me a portion of the Karen's own property. Not a huge chunk, but a beautifully poetic acre of lakeside land I'd always admired. Now every morning I sit out on my new dock, sipping coffee and listening to the loons. I salvaged the shed wreckage too, reusing the wood to build a cozy lakeside retreat. Meanwhile, I take great pleasure in seeing my former neighbor stewing on her slightly smaller plot of land next door. Maybe someday she'll learn you can't just bulldoze your way to a land grab, but I'm not holding my breath. This sweet lakeside revenge sure tastes better than any apology she could offer. When it comes to greedy Karens, sometimes turning the tables is the only way to win. The next one is a petty revenge story. So I was working with this guy, M42, and he needs a place to crash. His home had severe problems with roaches, and he couldn't live there no more until it was properly sorted out. So, to be generous, I agreed to let him stay a couple of days at my place until his wife could arrange some other accommodation. Now this guy was fine, easy to get on with, and helped out a lot round the house as like a thank you. But his son, M17, was the most entitled, annoying brat you could meet. He treated the place like it was his own. He'd noisily stay up all night on his laptop, loudly gaming and drinking Mountain Dew until it was time for school. I gamed with him a lot and we had fun, despite him being annoying sometimes. Though by about 11 p.m. of building stuff on Minecraft, I'd suggest going to bed. He'd also spend ages in the bathroom in the morning, either taking ages in the shower using all the hot water or just on his phone for some reason. Kind of a pain with other people in the house and only one bathroom. My place was on the other side of the city from his school, so he'd always have to be ready early so his dad could take him. Usually he'd still be late from his long periods spent in the bathroom or gaming. Even though his dad apologized profusely and had a talk with the boy, we both decided on a little petty revenge. The next school days, when he'd been up all night drinking Mountain Dew, I made sure to slip into the bathroom before him. He started knocking on the door, saying he had to go. I told him I'd be out in a minute but continued to run the water loudly, knowing he was probably squirming around outside. I texted his dad that the plan was in motion. After 10 minutes, I heard his dad say they were going to be late and that he'd better hurry. I came out just as his dad was bundling him and his school stuff into the car, as he was whining about really needing the bathroom, telling him it was available just as the car door was shut. That must have been a long and uncomfortable ride to school. The next one is a malicious compliance story. Back in 2014, I was hired to work on a cruise ship. I started off as a lowly restaurant steward, busting tables and mopping floors in the buffet. After a few months, I was promoted to back waiter and was moved to the main dining hall. I quickly caught on to the back waiter duties. My front waiter, whom we'll call Bert, not his real name, took notice of my hard work. After a couple of weeks in my new position, Bert told me that it's only a matter of time before I get promoted to a front waiter, and he wanted to start training me on how to be one. So he told me to shadow him when the next group of passengers was seated in our section, so I could observe how he did his front waiter duties. Unfortunately for us, The next group of passengers seated in our section was an 8-top of Karens. Bert and I welcomed them to the restaurant. They were friendly at first, and the head Karen, an older, heavier-set man, asked, "There is a show in the main theater. We want to see that begins in about an hour. Is it possible for us to get our dinners, eat them, and get to the show on time?" To which Bert said, "Absolutely, depending on what you order." After looking over the menu, the Karens were ready to place their order, and 5 out of 8 of them wanted the New York steak, the one single menu item that took the longest to cook. Bert told them this, and that if they all wanted to order the NY steak, there is no guarantee that we can get their dinners fast enough for them to eat and make it to the show on time. Bert suggested alternative dishes that we could get out much quicker, but the Karens refused to change their orders. Bert read the order back to the Karens, and they all confirmed that it was correct. Bert handed me the ticket, and I ran back to the kitchen to assemble their meals. My first stop was the NY steak counter, and to my horror, there was a line a mile long of waiters waiting to drop off their tickets. Just so you know, this ship has a maximum capacity of about 3,500 passengers. The main dining hall seats nearly 1,000 people, and I have never seen the NY counter as busy as it was this night. It seemed like everyone and their mothers were ordering the NY steak. I would have to wait at least 20 minutes just to drop off my ticket, and God knows how long afterward until the cook got to my ticket in order to cook them. With the wait time and juggling the other tables Bert and I had to wait on in our section, I knew there was no chance the Karens could get their meals and make it to the show on time. So I rushed out to Bert, told him what the ETA was on the NY steaks, and that he needed to tell the Karens that they needed to change their order, otherwise they would miss their show. Bert relayed my message to them. He came back to me and said that they still refused to change their order. Bert shrugged his shoulders and said, "Bert, well, we did all that we could to try and convince them to change their order so they can make it to the show they wanted to see, but they refused to change it. So if they miss their show, they miss it, and it will be their fault." I did my best to get their meal as quickly as possible while also waiting on the other tables in our section. Sure enough, the Karens missed the start of the show, and they were pissed. They demanded to speak to the restaurant manager. They fabricated multiple lies about the crappy service they received, saying that we were lazy, incompetent, purposely dragged our feet, and lied about how long they were really waiting for their meals. They said they were waiting over an hour since they got their appetizers, when it was only 50 minutes since they were seated in our section at most. Bert and I told the manager our side of the story. He believed us, said he would try and calm the Karens down, but told us to do our best to get the Karens their meals as quickly as possible so we could get them out of the restaurant ASAP. Finally, the meals were ready. I brought them out to the Karens and hoped that this would be the end of the fiasco. Unfortunately, it wasn't. 2 of the female Karens called Bert and me back to the table and complained, "Our steaks are rare. We ordered well done." Bert and I huddled. He looked over his notepad, where he had the 2 lady steaks written down as rare. He asked me if I heard them say they wanted rare steaks when we took their order earlier on, and I nodded. Yes. Bert approached them and said, "Hey, Bert. Ladies, my back waiter and I both heard you 2 say you wanted rare steaks. I read the order back to you, and you both said that the order was correct." But the Karens responded, "We've never ordered rare steaks in our lives. You 2 messed up. Take these back. We don't want them. We want brand new steaks." So Bert handed me the steaks and told me to go back into the kitchen and order 2 well-done New York steaks on the fly, which is restaurant lingo for it's an emergency, and we need this order right now. So I rushed back into the kitchen. The NY steak counter was still busier than it's ever been. I rushed to the cook and asked for 2 well-done NY steaks on the fly. The cook angrily yelled at me, "No one is getting anything on the fly tonight. You get your ass to the back of the line and wait your turn like everyone else." At this point, I began to panic. It was going to be at least another 40 minutes, if not longer, for the 2 Karens to get their well-done steaks. In an alternate reality, this would be a r/malicious compliance story, where I make the Karens wait the near hour-long time for them to get their new steaks, as they requested. But I didn't want Bert to deal with the Karens any longer than he had to, and the restaurant manager did tell me to do my best to get them their meals ASAP, so we can get them out of the restaurant as quickly as possible. So cue the malicious compliance. The Karens wanted well done. They're going to get well done. There were microwaves in the kitchen. I flipped the steaks over to hide the previously made cut marks, threw them into the microwave, and nuked them until they were well done. I brought them back out to the Karens and prayed to every deity I could think of that they wouldn't realize what I had done. Fortunately, they didn't. The Karens ate their meal in complete silence, giving Bert and me the dirtiest glares while doing so, and stormed off when they were finished. Once they left, I told Bert what I did. It took him a moment to process what I told him, and he finally said, "Bert, under normal circumstances, I would be very upset with you, and I strongly suggest that you never do what you just did ever again. However, these aren't normal circumstances. Those people were rude, unreasonable, liars, and they didn't even tip. So you know what? Screw them. I'm glad they missed their freaking show." In the near 2 years I've worked on that ship, I've dealt with many Karens, stories for another day. But I'll never forget this one. Just a reminder to everyone reading this story to please be kind to your waiters. The next one is an entitled people story. I, 25F, endured 3 years of extremely unfair treatment from my family in my relationship with my husband. His introduction to the family was initially just coming to church. He drove 3 hours one way to attend, and I had to fight to be able to spend time with him. I got told I was dating instead of soulmating, and had to basically not have a relationship while having one. My older sister said I was a bad example to other people, while my other sibling had 2 boys she was involved with at church at the same time. He also happens to be shorter than me, which was a complaint. Perhaps their vision of who I would be with was something else. He's honestly an amazing human who I'm blessed to be with. If he came in a different form, they wouldn't have treated him the way they did. He's still around because of his connections to church, but when it comes to family, he'd gladly not engage. They've really soured the pot. As soon as we got married in March 2023, everyone was loving, nice, and approving of us. It was very much night and day. My older sister, now 29, was a major antagonizer and not respectful of the relationship at all. She had never talked to a boy before. My older sister started talking to a guy from church a month after my wedding. Now a year has passed, and he's going to be proposing to her in 2 weeks. This guy honestly is a good person, but them combined just rubs me wrong. I see them engage, they go on dates, they're able to talk about their future. These are all things that I was shamed for and mistreated for. I had to confront her in late 2023 to address that she treated me terribly. I got an apology, but it didn't truly address jealousy and the ridiculous bias she displayed. She hasn't taken steps to truly work on the relationship she broke. She's focused on what she wants. There's going to be at least 20 people attending this proposal, and everyone is participating and helping out in the process. She's even sent me wedding dresses and she hasn't been proposed to. I got no emotional support through my whole relationship process and forced to pay for and have a wedding. The joy and happiness that finding a lifetime partner brings was stolen away. Being near this relationship has drained me in ways I didn't think possible. I'm trying to grow up and heal, but it's really starting to become unbearable. Everyone around thinks she's amazing and great, and the only one in the back who thinks she isn't a good person is her younger sister, who she was evil to. Mind you, there are 2 other sisters, and they are fine and supporting. I don't know if I should suck up going to this engagement and future wedding. I know it will cause problems if I don't. Thank you for watching. I would really appreciate it if you could like the video and subscribe to our channel if you haven't already. We'll see you again tomorrow.